Hello, and welcome to this eSchool News webcast. My name is Andrew Barber. I'm a senior contributing editor, and I'll be acting as the moderator today's presentation, which is sponsored by Xirrus. It's titled E-rate 2016, Top 5 Educator Pitfalls in the E-rate application process. Before I introduce our two speakers, I want to take a couple of minutes to highlight a few items. First, today's event will be recorded, so you don't have to worry about scribbling down notes or anything like that. In a couple of days, you'll get an email from us that will have a link in it to the recorded event, and you'll also be able to download a PDF of the presentation from that same email. And second, please do ask questions, and don't feel as if you have to wait until the very end. At any time during the presentation, if you have a question, just type it into the Q&A box on your console and hit that submit button. We'll take some time during the presentation to answer some of your questions, and I hope at the end we'll have a few additional minutes when our speakers can answer some more questions. We also have a chat function which can be launched. If you look at the bottom of your screen, it's the brown group chat icon. And please use the chat to talk among yourselves or to contact me or the eSchool News team with any technical issues or concerns that you may have. But please don't use the chat function to ask the presenters questions. They simply don't have time to monitor the chats while they're also giving a presentation. If you do have a question for them, just use the Q&A panel instead. Without further ado, let's turn to today's speakers. Bruce Miller is Vice President, Product Marketing for Xirrus Wi-Fi Networks. He has 25 years of experience bringing telecommunications products to market in marketing, business development, and engineering roles. At Xirrus, he has led product marketing, product management, customer support, training, and PR functions. And prior to Xirrus, he held marketing and engineering roles at Ixia, Lucent, Cabletron, and NetVantage, covering technologies including switching, routing, wireless, storage, DSL, and cable. Bruce holds a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from the California Institute of Technology. Our second speaker today, Brian Stevens, is a Senior Technology and Regulatory Analyst at Funds for Learning, a professional firm that specializes in the federal E-rate funding program. He joined the group in 2003 and provides clients with detailed analysis and guidance in the areas of product and service eligibility, service substitutions, cost allocation methodologies, and regulatory compliance. He also conducts E-rate workshops and training seminars across the country. Now that you know something about who's behind the voices, let's get started. Welcome, Brian and Bruce. It's an honor to have you here today. Bruce, why don't you lead us off?
Great. Thank you, Andrew. And thank you, everyone, for joining here today. We appreciate you attending. We have a full agenda here today. We're going to talk through a little bit of setup on the learning revolution and what we're leading into with E-rate, which is the federal funding program that is allowing many schools around the country to fund their technology initiatives. And we'll walk through that and highlight some of the key things that you need to know to apply for and successfully get E-rate funding for this year. And then we'll talk a little bit about our solutions that are specifically designed to handle wireless and be funded by E-rate funds within your organization. And then, as Andrew mentioned, questions as well, so please enter them into the Q&A window as we go through here. We want to make this for you, and we, in fact, will tailor some of the discussion around, the type of questions that we see coming in. So please feel free to enter questions along the way as you go. So just to start off a little bit here in terms of kind of where we're at, if you look at the way that learning has taken place in the classroom over the last 100+ years, it really has been very much the same approach of one-to-many, classrooms of kids, 20, 30, 40 in a classroom, all listening to a teacher at the front of the class, whether it's on the chalkboard, on the whiteboard, or on a smartboard. It's really all the same, and it basically puts a common way of teaching across all students, regardless of their abilities and regardless of their level to learn more or otherwise. You hold back certain students because of others, and you teach everyone in the same way. So the revolution that's really underway, as everybody is aware of, is really the ability for personalized education, having individualized devices and curriculum that can be tailored to the specific needs of the kid. And this then can be done through devices like tablets and laptops, where the experience is now individualized. And there are many technologies that are required to support this and to actually make this happen under the hood. And a lot of these are the things that E-rate specifically helps to address. Now, one of the challenges is getting that technology into the hands of the schools and into the kids and making that available to everyone. Now, one of the things, we talked about some of the different things, so you've heard of programs like one-to-one and BYOD and personalized learning and all these types of methodologies. You have to have the technology under the hood to make that happen. It's not just the device and the software, but the infrastructure behind that to get onto the internet to support the online type of curriculum. And the challenge that we typically see, however, is that, let's see here, the slide isn't coming up here for me. Okay, here. So the challenge that we see is that the Wi-Fi itself just needs to work, and oftentimes that's not the case. The FCC has actually indicated from their side that up to 60% of U.S. schools lack the sufficient infrastructure to support this. So there's obviously a big need in the sense that many schools do not have Wi-Fi at all. And if you listen to Tom Wheeler, FCC chairman, this is a statement he made back in 2014 that kicked off some of the modernization of E-rate that we're talking about. Many schools do not have Wi-Fi, and those that do not have sufficient Wi-Fi to support this. So with that, I'm going to pass this over to Brian Stevens from Funds for Learning to talk a little bit about E-rate and the ways that you can acquire funding to help to bridge this technology gap. Brian?
Well, thank you, Bruce, and welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to be able to spend a little bit of time speaking to you today about the E-rate program. So we'll go ahead and get started. We describe the E-rate really as a series of opportunities, and with that come a few challenges. So the opportunity in the E-rate program is significant. This is the largest single source of educational technology funding in the United States. It has an annual minimum of $3.9 billion available in the form of discounts on purchases to schools and libraries. And in any given year, they may roll over additional money to even increase the total amount that's available in any given year. And the program is designed to provide funding for the foundation for these, digital initiatives to succeed. So if we want to do one-to-one, if we want to do high-definition video, those types of things that require robust networks and high-capacity bandwidth connections, this is the program that is designed to support that. Now, with that opportunity comes a little bit of a challenge. It's a bureaucratic program. There are rules and regulations and forms and deadlines and things that you need to keep in mind in order to be successful. We work with a lot of different schools across the country, from teeny tiny to large urban school districts and everywhere in between. And while everybody does business a little bit differently, the one unifying theme that we see among schools who are leveraging the program successfully, and incidentally those who are the least stressed out by the process, are the ones who take the time on the front end to put together a strategic plan for the entire application process from start to finish. So I'd like you to keep that in mind as we work through some of the things that we're talking about today. Think about how these aspects affect your school or library and how they need to contribute to your overall strategic plan for filing for E-rate discounts in the upcoming funding year. So the E-rate program is designed to provide discounts on the purchase of connectivity and infrastructure. it's services that we need to connect our school to the outside world, whether that's our internet connectivity coming into the district or wide area network connectivity between all of our buildings, or even telephone service that we use to place telephone calls. Those are all services that are allowing us to communicate outside the property line, and they are eligible in what we call Category 1 services, services to the building. Category 2 is where our infrastructure purchases are made, and so that's picking up those connectivity services where the service provider drops them off at the front door and efficiently getting them through the building out to the classroom, to the devices that are in students' and teachers' hands. And so that's Category 2, the infrastructure components. So it's sort of a complete connectivity and infrastructure picture. You have your incoming bandwidth connections to get you connected to the world, and then inside the building you have robust local area network connectivity to efficiently utilize those connectivity services. Now, the amount of discount that you receive on these purchases depends on what type of service you're purchasing and the percentage of students in your school that qualify to receive free and reduced price school lunches through the National School Lunch Program that's administered by the USDA. And what we have on the screen here is the discount matrix. So on the left-hand side, you take the raw percentage of students in the school district. That's the total number of students enrolled compared to the total number of students that qualify for free lunches. And then you translate that over depending on whether you're in an urban or rural area and buying Category 1 or Category 2 services. You can determine the discount that you'll receive on your purchases. The discounts range anywhere from 20% on the low end all the way up to 85% for Category 2 and 90% for Category 1 on the high end. So this program for some of the schools in higher poverty areas is actually allowing schools to purchase connectivity and infrastructure at 10 to 15 cents on the dollar. So let's talk a little bit more detail about Category 2 services, the types of products and services that qualify for these Category 2 discounts. What Category 2 is funding is really the building blocks of your local area network infrastructure. So certainly this includes things like switching and routing, but also wireless network equipment. So all of the access points that you need and controllers, whether they're a hardware controller, a virtual appliance, or a cloud-based solution, access points and control are eligible for discounts in Category 2. In addition to that, they will pay for the structured cabling that you need to get all of the access points connected. And beyond that, they will pay for things like shipping, taxes, fees, installation, and configuration. So if the piece of equipment is eligible, everything that you need to get it installed and up and running and operational will be eligible for discounts as well. And again, we're talking about the local area network infrastructure components at a given location. Generally speaking, if it's required piece of equipment in order for a student to access the internet, there's a good chance that it will be eligible for an E-rate discount. Now, they do give you a couple of different options for procuring Category 2 functionality. You can certainly make hardware purchases and receive a discount on those purchases. That's the internal connections category, and that's where you would be buying the access points and switches and cabling and things. One of the other options that you have is to get that functionality as a managed service. And the program calls this Managed Internal Broadband Services. And these are services like managed Wi-Fi and other types of managed networks. Now, there's a parity of functionality that's involved here. So what they say is, the function of wireless or switching is eligible for Category 2 discounts, whether you're buying hardware that you own to accomplish that functionality, or if you're taking it as a managed services that may include leased equipment, to accomplish those functions. There's not anything that's eligible as a managed service that's not eligible as an internal connections purchase, but you do have an option to take it as a service if you prefer. Some cases, the managed service may include equipment that's being leased from the service provider. In other cases, you may already own some existing equipment and you would like the service provider to come in and manage and operate the network by a third party. Now, in addition to the hardware purchases that qualify for support and the ancillary shipping, taxes, fees, installation, they will pay for the ongoing maintenance and upkeep of that equipment. So if a piece of equipment is eligible, like a wireless access point, what they call basic maintenance of that access point is eligible as well. It would include your ongoing technical support, where you can call to get issue resolution if there's a problem. Things like software patches and bug fixes and security updates all fall under this umbrella. Just sort of the routine maintenance items that go along with these large-scale and complicated networks can qualify for a discount in Category 2 as well. So it makes a complete picture with respect to your local area network infrastructure at a given site. They pay for the equipment, its installation, and its ongoing maintenance and support as a complete package in order to make sure that the networks are running efficiently and continue to serve the need of the school. And when we talk about Category 2 services, it's important to know that there is what we call a Category 2 budget, or in reality it's a funding cap. So the FCC has placed an upper limit on the amount of money that any given school can receive in the form of discounts on Category 2 purchases. And there's a way that we calculate that, and we'll talk about it today. It's important for planning purposes to know, about how much money you can expect to receive in support for these types of products and services so that you can plan accordingly. So we have a funding cap in place. It goes over a 5-year period, and it's just a cumulative running total. So every time you submit a funding application for Category 2 services, it adds to the running total, and eventually that running total hits a certain threshold, and after that there will be no more discounts available. And that goes over a 5-year period. It replaces the old 2 and 5 rule, so you can apply in every single year if you want. But how you use the funding is really up to you. You can spend your entire budget in 1 year. You could do half of it now and half of it 4 years from now. You could divide it by 5 and request an even amount every year for some sort of recurring service or something like that. How you do it is up to you. It's just this sort of cumulative running total that goes on a 5-year basis. Now, the way that you calculate this is on a per-site basis, and the way that it is enforced is also on a per-site basis. So if we have a small school district with an elementary school, a middle school, and a high school, each one of those individual school buildings will calculate its own specific funding cap, and the caps are not shared between sites. So unfortunately, if we had a huge need at the high school, but we didn't really need a whole lot at the elementary school, we couldn't use some of the elementary school's budget to supplement some of the additional equipment needed at the high school. It's calculated and enforced on a per-site basis. And what we have on the screen here is the formula for calculating it. It's relatively simple. You take the enrollment at the location. So if we have a high school, we'll say it's got 300 kids enrolled, and you multiply that times $150. What that gives you is what we call the pre-discount budget cap. So you can see from the example here, 300 students times $150 per student gives us $45,000. What that means is that the program will pay for discounts on purchases that total up to $45,000. Now, when I say it provides discounts, how much? Well, that depends on your discount rate. In this example, this particular school had an 80% discount rate, so that means that they can receive up to $36,000 in discounts or funding to support purchases that total that $45,000. Now, because we're moving into the second year of these Category 2 budgets, if you applied in the current year, in funding year 2015, in order to know what a site's budget is for the next year, you would need to subtract out any funding that may have been approved in the current year. Now, the budgets do get calculated annually, and they will fluctuate depending on fluctuations in enrollment. So if you have a site that has an increase in enrollment, you recalculate the budget every single year, and if it's 100 students more than last year, you get 100 times 150 dollars additional budget on top of that. It does also adjust downward. So if you have a decrease in enrollment, you'll calculate it in the next year, and it'll be based on the enrollment, the total enrollment in that year. Now, the one caveat to that is that if the budget decreases to a point where it's below what has already been approved and spent, they don't require you to repay the difference. But it does get calculated annually and can adjust upwards or downwards until it's maxed out. Here's a couple of examples. Again, the first one is the one we just looked at. 300 students, $150 per student. We multiply that by the discount rate. In this case, the school did not receive any discounts in 2015, so they have a full $36,000 of E-rate funding that they can qualify for in the 5-year period to support purchases up to $45,000. Second example is a little bit different. We've got a little bit bigger site, 400 kids. In this case, we use the same $150 per student calculation factor. This is a 60% site, so we multiply it by 60%. And in this case, this school applied for $10,000 worth of funding in 2015, so we subtract that out. So when I'm looking at their 2016 budget, they have $26,000 of E-rate funds available to them for 2016 and also the next 4 years because they started their process in 2015. So that just gives you a little bit of background about what qualifies for Category 2 funding, as well as the amount of money that you can reasonably expect to receive in discounts at each of your school locations. So think through how that might affect you as you're doing your plan and looking towards upgrading or replacing your existing local area network infrastructure. Now, here's a real high-level overview of the E-rate process. And we don't have time to go into each one of these steps in detail, but just to kind of give you the 10,000-foot view of sort of what's going to be happening and at what time of the year. Right now is when we're doing these strategic plans. It's when we're sitting down and trying to decide what it is we need for the upcoming year. So we're looking at the time period from roughly July 1st, 2016 to June 30th, 2017, and then even on out further in the future than that. What are our needs going to be? It may be that our internet connection is fine for now, but we know that we're going to do a one-to-one initiative with, say, Chromebooks later on in July, or in January, right? Well, probably our bandwidth needs are going to increase when we onboard 1,000 new devices onto our network. So we're thinking forward to sort of what our initiatives are and what we are going to need infrastructure-wise to support that, and developing those specifications and descriptions of our needs. The reason we do that now is that the next step in the process is a procurement process. So you determine what it is that you need, and then you're required to put that need out for a competitive bid. So you file a form called the FCC Form 470. It describes what products and services you're looking to purchase, and it's an open invitation to bid for any service provider in the country to contact you and say, hey, I see you're looking for a wireless network. I sell wireless networks, and I would like to talk to you so that I can send you a proposal. The idea there is that by forcing schools to put the products and services out for bid, it spurs competition, which in turn lowers prices and increases cost effectiveness. And so you do that bid process. And that's the next step of the process. It's something you're going to need to be getting started on soon, because once you do the competitive bid and then evaluate your bids and select a solution, the next step is submitting an application for funding. So that will happen at some point between January 2016 and March 2016, being the open and close dates. They haven't set the official dates yet, so we don't know on exactly what days it will open and close, but they continue to estimate that it'll open early January, and if history is any guide, it'll close sometime mid-March, usually around spring break. So you can kind of plan for that way. So you submit an application. At that point, you've put a need out for bid. You've selected a service provider to fulfill that need and signed a contract with them. So you know exactly what it is that you're buying, from whom, and what it's going to cost, so you submit an application to receive a discount on that purchase. That application will go under a review process. That can take anywhere from just a few weeks to several months down the line, just depending on where you fall in the queue, but the administrator will review your application, potentially ask you some questions about it to make sure that you followed all the rules and everything. And then ultimately they will issue you a decision on your application. So hopefully you've done everything right up to that point. You submitted the application, it was reviewed, and they say, congratulations, you've been approved. At that point, you go out and make the purchase of the products and services, and then once you've made the purchase and bought what you're entitled to a discount on, you file some paperwork to be dispersed that discount. So this is sort of the annual process, and there's different aspects of this that happen during the year. So at any given time, you may be doing procurement for the future funding year, the one that's coming up, and you may also be doing the payment paperwork and things from the prior parts of the year. It just sort of runs on a funding year basis, year over year. One sort of top-of-mind topic, if you are not familiar, is that the E-rate Program Administrator has built a brand new portal system called the E-rate Productivity Center. It's abbreviated EPC, and it's called EPIC for short. And what this is it's a new E-rate portal. It is where they are putting all of the new forms and communication with the administrator. It's going to be sort of a one-stop shop for all things E-rate and communicating with USAC, the program administrator. At their annual training sessions for applicants across the country that they've been conducting, they actually have gone in front of folks and said, you're not going to be able to do business with us unless you have access to this portal. The first program form that they put in there is the FCC Form 470. So if you're familiar with the program and you've been filing forms for a while, you may know that the Form 470 online has been the same for a number of years. It is entirely different now. It's a ground-up, brand-new system inside EPC, and there is no other filing option. The old system has gone away, and they're not accepting forms via paper any longer. So if you have not already done so, your very first to-do list as far as E-rate is concerned is to make sure that you get your account established. They should have emailed you a username and password at some point. It would have been a while ago now. If you didn't receive it, there's a 1-800 number that you can call to get your account established. They'll send you a new username and password and work through the process with you there. But just be aware that the Form 470 is brand new, both in terms of the content that goes on it as well as the system that you use to prepare and post it. So when you're doing your strategic plan, you need to be factoring in additional time because of that, because you're going to be unfamiliar with the new system. Everybody was, because it's entirely new for everyone this year. So, as of today, what do we suggest that you do? Takeaways to go home, or go back to the office and say, okay, here's the things that we need to get done soon. Obviously, number one is establishing your login to the E-rate Productivity Center. If you haven't done that yet, strongly suggest you doing that. And then just sitting down and really taking a detailed look at what your needs are going to be in terms of connectivity services and infrastructure components for the upcoming school year. What are you going to need to purchase? Where do you have deficiencies? Where do you anticipate rapid growth, and you need to proactively build up the infrastructure to meet that? All of those things go into your strategic plan whenever you're preparing for an upcoming funding year. So just a few things that we see in terms of best practices and some mistakes that we see made, and things that you can really save yourself a lot of heartache and stress if you're paying attention to some of these sort of nitty-gritty details. The first thing is pay attention to your calendar. Sit down and identify all of the steps that you'll need to take. So you have to file a Form 470, you have to accept bids for 28 days. You have to review and evaluate the bids, select a service provider, negotiate a contract, submit an application. All of that takes time, and you're gathering information from various interdepartmental areas in your school district. You need to get lunch numbers from food services and information about the products from IT and information about billing and payment from accounting. You're crossing a lot of internal departments, and you're on a schedule and getting all of these things done, working towards that application deadline. So sit down and put all that on a calendar and sort of have milestones and know when you're going to do certain things and factor in everybody's vacation schedules and school board meeting schedules and all of those things to put together a nice sort of time frame for moving forward. Pay really a close attention to the instructions that you're given for all the forms that you're filing. That seems fairly straightforward, but in fact you can find a lot of really good information in the instructions that are given. Occasionally we run into schools that just flat do it wrong, even though the instructions specifically describe what to do and when. Pay attention to the information on the form and the instructions that are given for filling it out. It's always best to pause and ask questions along the way if you don't understand something, as opposed to just taking a stab at it and then ultimately finding out that it was not done properly. The new E-rate Productivity Center uses a wizard-based form creation system. You can save your progress, exit, and come back to forms later on. So if you hit a certain point and you don't understand what's being asked, save your progress, bounce out and ask a question, get the clarification you need, and then pick it back up. We see a lot of mistakes made in terms of responsiveness to the administrators. So they review your applications, and as a part of that, they may reach out to you with questions. Sometimes everything that gets submitted with the application is not immediately clear, and they need some additional detail. If they do that, you want to be responsive to them. Applications get denied year over year because USAC reaches out with questions, and ultimately nobody responds to their inquiries. Whatever email address that you're using as a contact on the form, make sure that it's up to date, that it's functional, be sure that you've got somebody monitoring it, and that you've got your access to what may be blocked as junk mail or spam, just to make sure that things aren't getting filtered. Because if they don't receive any response from you for their inquiries, then they can deny the entire application. In audits and post-commitment reviews, one of the things that we see come up over and over again is insufficiencies in documentation. You're required to keep all your E-rate related documents for a period of 10 years from the last date of service. And they expect that if they ask you for a 7-year-old telephone bill one day, that you'll be able to produce that. Sit down and put together sort of a document retention plan or policy that addresses what you're going to keep, how you're going to store it, who has access to it, how it's retrieved, what happens in the event of a disaster, all those types of things, so that you've got a nice, neat plan for retaining your documentation, just in case it's ever requested in the future. And finally, as much as I hate to admit it, there are sort of, in-the-moment changes that get made to USAC's procedures and their website and some of the program's processes. And so not staying tuned in, not paying attention to those things can really be a problem. We would highly suggest that you identify as many sources as possible for E-rate newsletters. The administrator has one, Funds for Learning has one. There's other consultancies that have newsletters, that all free of charge. We really recommend subscribing to those, so that if there are last-minute changes or things that you need to know that may be different than what your experience has been in the past, that you can be notified of those, so that you know what the new rules and processes and correct ways to do things are moving forward. So just some things to keep in mind in the overview of the program, and I think we'll pause for a moment here and see if we've received any questions we might be able to address.
Yeah, Brian, thanks so much for walking us through the ins and outs of E-rate funds. We do have a bunch of questions that have come in from the audience and Flip. before I pass this over to Bruce, let's take some time and go through a few of those. One of the questions from the audience relates to private schools, and are private schools eligible to apply for E-rate discounts? And if so, how do they calculate those discounts?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. The answer is yes, a private school is eligible to participate. The criteria are that it has to be recognized by the school or regulated by the state as a K-12 school. So you have to be sort of whatever your state accreditation process is, or it's got to be regulated as a K-12 school, elementary or secondary education. You have to operate on a not-for-profit basis, and you have to have an annual endowment of less than $50 million. Assuming that you meet those criteria, you should be eligible to participate. Now, as far as the discount rate is concerned, it depends on whether or not your school participates in the USDA's National School Lunch Program. Our experience is that some private schools do and other private schools don't. If you don't participate in the National School Lunch Program, there are alternative discount calculation methods that you can use. The most common of those is a survey, where you survey your student body, ask certain questions about household income levels, and then you can identify qualified students based on the results of your survey. There are a couple of other less commonly used alternative discount calculation methods available to you as well, depending on your specific circumstance.
Okay, great, thank you. And one other question, you talked during your presentation about some of the caps of how schools calculate how much they're eligible for, but there was some uncertainty about the difference between Category 1 and Category 2. So if you want to apply, let's say, for Category 2 funding, is it affected by any Category 1 funding that you've already received?
It is not. So there are no caps or spending limits whatsoever in Category 1, and there's no limitation on the number of times that you can apply for Category 1. So the FCC refused to put any sort of caps or budgets in the Category 1 area. So you can apply for as much Category 1 as you have a need for year over year over year, and that will not affect your ability to receive Category 2 discounts. In Category 2, we have the funding cap that we discussed today, the $150 per student over 5 years. That cap is in place, but you can apply for Category 2 annually, at least as long as you've still got remaining budgets available at the sites.
Okay, great. All right, thank you for clarifying that. And let's tackle one more question before we move on. Someone in the audience said she's new to her position, and she wants to apply for E-rate for wireless internet for the building. And how can she find out if the school has a cap in place already? She knows the school has applied in the past, but she wants to know how much. She wants to know how she finds out the past details, so to speak.
Yeah, you can. There's a couple of different sources that you can use to look up historical funding requests. So the program administrator's website is usac.org, usac.org/SL. The SL stands for Schools and Libraries, SL. There's some search tools on that page. In the left-hand menu, you'll see a link that says Search Tools, and one of those search tools is what they call the Data Retrieval Tool. And you can actually fill in information about your particular school, and it will return back an Excel worksheet with details about the prior year's E-rate funding requests. So you can see all of the pertinent 471 application numbers and FRNs and amounts and service providers and the whole bit. So that's a good way to kind of get familiar with some of the history. Now, if the school has applied in the past, per the rules, that documentation should exist somewhere at the school because of the document retention requirements. So we'd suggest trying to pull together as much of that as you can. It may be in the archive or buried in a folder in a file cabinet somewhere, but that's another way that you might be able to go back and sort of piece together that history. Now, as far as applying for discounts on an internet connection, you can do that in Category 1, so your internet line that you get, your school's connection to the internet is an eligible Category 1 expense. There are no caps or budgets associated with that. It's only the equipment purchases for switches and wireless and routers and things that are subject to that cap. You can apply for Internet in Category 1 every single year, and you don't have to calculate a funding cap in order to receive discounts on Internet connectivity services.
That's right. Well, thank you, Brian, for such detailed answers to those questions. In fact, and we will call upon you towards the end of the presentation as well to answer some more questions if possible. In the meantime, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce to take it up from there. Bruce, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. And thanks, Brian. Some great questions coming in. So again, pop them in and we'll leave a slot at the end here to talk about and answer these questions. What I want to get into next here for a brief section is to talk about some of the technology solutions that are eligible for E-rate funding, and in particular Wi-Fi solutions, which is what we produce as a vendor. And if you look at what we talked about up front, the FCC is putting out funding to basically address the shortcoming in Wi-Fi infrastructure in schools around the country, where it's identified that there is a definite shortfall. Many schools don't have Wi-Fi. The majority of those that do actually don't have sufficient Wi-Fi. So the idea and the motivation is to upgrade the infrastructure to support all of these initiatives that are in play for next generation 21st century learning. So what happens in a lot of cases that we see is, the technology rolls out. There's a bunch of iPads or laptops rolled out to the students, maybe some new LMS, some new learning software, online testing initiatives, things like this. And the infrastructure itself might fall down when you load it up with all these new students online. And some of the challenges that we typically see are, these right here: accessibility, just getting on the network; scalability, supporting 70 devices per classroom that we've seen in extreme cases; the reliability of that connection; and then the adaptability to change over time. So one of the things to look at is when you're installing infrastructure funded by E-rate, you have a 5-year window for that money. It's going to last you 5 years, $150 per student over that course of time. You want that solution to look forward and support that requirement for that period of time. So let's talk a little bit about some of these challenges here and how they can be addressed. The accessibility challenge is just lots of people, lots of devices. How do I get everybody on that network? And one of the key things here is to not set up roadblocks or barriers to make that happen. If you have 1,000 students, you want everybody to have connectivity and to have that as seamless as possible, and not worry about which network to use, what password to use, and you as an IT administrator, the security of that network. And a lot of times there are roadblocks that are put in place by just the technology itself. One of the key things that we have been investing a lot of effort into is a solution called EasyPass, which makes that simple. Just at a very high level, getting the devices on the network and even connecting the networks to the devices. And this is key to removing the headaches from the day-to-day administration of a network like this and to make it seamlessly run. So there is a whole set of modules and in use cases for EasyPass, but the bottom line is simplifying that process and ensuring that students can get onto the network very easily and securely so that data can't be hacked, grades or passwords or things like that cannot be snooped off the network. It's important to install security in these systems, and that's one of the things that a solution like EasyPass can do. A second challenge, we kind of walking through these 4 that we introduced up front, is the scalability challenge. So 5 years ago, 10 years ago, maybe you had Wi-Fi in your school, but you didn't have the extreme density that we're seeing today, where we can get, again, classrooms with 60, 70, 80 devices on in one place because you have phones plus you have the laptops or whatever the student using for class. Auditoriums, meeting rooms, things like this obviously can get very dense, and this extends to libraries and even outdoor scenarios where we have a number of customers we know that are taking classrooms outside and holding it out under the tree, because you have Wi-Fi connectivity and you can actually move the classroom around in a very mobile, flexible environment. So these now become challenges everywhere, where you have the issue of how do you scale that Wi-Fi network to support extreme densities. Traditional approaches deal with that with kind of a standard product that's been known for years, a 2-radio AP. The issue is when I now put 50 or 60 or 80 or hundreds of users on that network, I need to add a lot more APs, a very inefficient way of doing things. What we have done is pioneered a method that actually scales that network to 4, 8, or 16 radios. So just like selling the switch, if I have more users trying to connect to Wi-Fi, I put more radios, which allows more connections to that. Very unique approach, but it scales a lot more elegantly. Imagine a large auditorium where I put maybe 2 or 3 of the high-density devices here as opposed to 10 or 15 regular access points from other solutions. This is how you address density, and one of the key ways that we believe a school needs to go to really scale up to these new requirements. Again, what happened 5 years ago is very different to what's going on today with all of these devices and all the needs and use cases for wireless. Which then leads to, and here's just a quick kind of mapping of some of our specific solutions to the density, low density on the left and high density on the right, so we can address all the different use cases you have. Which leads to my next topic of just reliability. So you can have Wi-Fi, but maybe it doesn't work that well. And when I talk to customers almost all the time, I see, raise of hands, how many had a great Wi-Fi connection the last hotel you stayed in, or the last airport that you were waiting in, or the last cafe that you were, drinking a coffee in. Usually some of those situations, that there was problems, right? You have a bad connection, the pages take 20 seconds to load when you're on a website. If you're in a classroom and you are trying to conduct a class with 30 kids, all try to do the same thing at the same time, maybe watch a video, that can be very challenging. The reliability, maybe it works when you just had one student or yourself trying to test it, before class started, and now all of a sudden 30 get on and it doesn't work. That's because all these things are competing. You have critical usage of the network, maybe watching video or doing an online test, versus recreational use because students are bringing in their devices and maybe watching ESPN Sports or streaming something live. They're all competing for the same bandwidth, and you need to be able to identify the applications that are important and then either block or deprioritize the ones that are not. And this is where an application level visibility is very important. Something that we achieve with something called application control. It gives you that reliable connection. That's a bottom line fundamental for learning when you are relying on that Wi-Fi network to do what it needs to do. So that's how we address reliability. And again, we're talking about the things needed to take a Wi-Fi infrastructure and make it last 5 years and meet your true needs of your school, funded by this E-rate opportunity. The fourth one is adaptability. So this is just an example of, say, what technology changes have happened with iPhones over the course of years, but the key message here is that it's very dynamic. It changes all the time. You don't know what next is coming, and especially within a 5-year window, what is going to be happening on that network. So one of the things that I think is very important in wireless technology is adaptability, the ability to morph the infrastructure and change it over time to achieve that. One of the things that we specifically do is something called Turbo Express. So a traditional Wi-Fi network with 2 radio access points might have a mix of slower and faster clients. But what happens is over time, you have more and more of the fast new technology, and you need the ability to program that the access points and the technology you're deploying to adapt to the changing client base. And that's something that we do with a feature called Turbo Express, but basically allows you to adapt your Wi-Fi infrastructure over time to meet the changing requirements that are happening. So something to think about when you're looking at a 5-year window for technology purchases, when the devices and the applications you're running could actually be changing daily or certainly yearly with new devices, but new things come out all the time. So 4 considerations to make when looking at wireless infrastructure. And just to kind of summarize, some of the key things here: scalability, adaptability, reliability. And then when we talk about deploying high-density gear and have adaptable products that can change over time, you ultimately end up with a bottom-line value as well, because you're spending less money on refreshing that equipment or adding new equipment to change to your needs, as opposed to having the ability to adapt it over time and actually deploy less equipment because you have high-density products available. So there is a bottom-line value associated with this solution. Okay, so when you talk about E-rates specifically, I want to make you aware of some of the specific bundles and packages that we have put together to address the wireless challenges for schools that are applying for E-rate. We have selected a key set of our solutions and are targeting them for E-rate. You can see on the left 4 different access points. There's a value solution, which is very low cost, an all-purpose solution, say 1 AP per classroom, high-performance solution. If you're looking down towards the future, there is new, latest, greatest Wi-Fi technology called 11AC Wave 2, and we have a solution for that. If you are looking at a long-term horizon for your solution, this certainly allows you to buy into a higher performance technology that has a longer lifespan right out of the gate. And this is what we see a lot of our customers doing, is leveraging E-rate dollars to purchase ahead for technology that's coming down the road, or that's available now but will be the norm in a few years in the industry. And then finally, the bottom one there, the XD4 high density. So 4 radios, one of these can replace up to 4 access points in a network, because it's completely programmable to 11AC. So a very flexible solution for those meeting rooms, libraries, cafeterias, and even in classrooms. When we have high density customers in classrooms, they're starting to put these now in place of 2 or more APs. So a solution that allows you to actually reduce the amount of equipment. The next thing is then you choose a management solution, and then you choose a term for that. So 16 different bundles specifically designed for E-rate with a very aggressive price point to support the requirements that you might have. And finally here, just a couple of resources. If you're interested in more information about some of our solutions, you can contact us here. But also check out our website, erate.xirrus.com. We have a step-by-step little wizard that walks you through the 7 steps of E-rate, how to apply, where all the forms are. So we're trying to provide everything in one place that makes it real easy to get into the process. We'll link to all the requirements that you have. We also have a calculator tool where you can plug in some of the numbers that Brian was talking about earlier and actually understand your exact funding level. All you need is 3 pieces of information: your student enrollment, your urban-rural classification, and your MLSP discount number. And we point also, if you're a private school, to the forms to find what that number is. And then that translates to your discount rate, and then also to your final, your actual funding budget. So that calculator is a very useful way of figuring out where you are in the process and can go from there. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Andrew, and we will continue here now with more of your questions. Andrew?
All right, thanks so much, Bruce, and thank you, Brian, for both of you for sharing your insights both about E-rate and some of the options for connectivity and infrastructure available to schools. We have about 8 minutes remaining, so let's go straight into the questions. And Brian, I'm going to come straight back to you. A question about whether Category 2 funding is now guaranteed for everyone, regardless of their free or reduced lunch percentage rate, or whether it can sometimes be restricted, as it was in the past, apparently, to people with higher percentages.
That's an excellent question. And it's a little bit of a crystal ball type question, I will admit. But the short answer is that my personal opinion is that everyone who submits a Category 2 application in 2016 will receive funding. That was the case in 2015, actually. There was enough money in the fund to satisfy all of the Category 2 demands. So everybody who submitted an application that was compliant with the rules in 2015 was funded. I anticipate that that will happen in 2016 as well. Now, technically, they do have the ability to institute a threshold if the demand in a given year outpaces the amount of money that's available for distribution. But between the $3.9 billion minimum and then the roughly $500 to $800 million additional rollover that they could pull in if they need it, I think there's a very good chance that they'll be able to fund every Category 2 application in funding year 2016. If for some reason they did not, if the demand just goes through the roof in this next year and they have to do a threshold, inevitably what that's going to mean is that some of the schools that applied and created that demand will have exhausted their Category 2 budgets and won't be able to request any more money for the next 4 or 5 years. So if we do see a high demand year and there's a discount threshold in that year, my expectation is that in the next year, those schools that fell below the threshold would then have their chance to receive funding. If you actually do the calculation of the total amount of money required to satisfy every dollar of the 5-year budget for every single school in the country, there actually is enough money in the fund over the 5 years to satisfy everyone's Category 2 budget regardless of discount rate. So it's really no longer a question anymore of will I get Category 2 funding. The only sort of unsettled question that we won't know for sure is if there's a timing issue, and really that would only come into play if we have a year with an abnormally high level of demand.
All right. Thank you, Brian. I'm going to stick with you on, and to clarify this 5-year, the 5-year span limit that you were talking about. Is this a rolling 5 years? So if you enter the 6th year, does your first year drop off and that's the amount of money that is now available to you again? Or how does that 5-year limit work?
It actually resets after the 5-year period. So the calculation, the 5-year calculation starts with the first year that you submit an application. So if you submitted for Category 2 in 2015, your 5-year span is 2015, 16, 17, 18, and 19. In 2020, it would roll over again, and you would have the next 5 years budget available to you at that point. So it's not a rolling in that 1 year falls off and then you get more. It's more in 5-year blocks, if you will. You've got the 5-year period to use the budget, and then the next 5-year period starts after that.
Okay, great. And as a follow-up to that, the same person wanted to know, for filling out all of this paperwork, are most schools hiring a consultant to do this, or do they task someone in-house to complete the process?
Both, actually. There are a number of consultants across the country who work with schools to prepare the E-rate paperwork. Funds for Learning is one of those, but a lot of school districts do it themselves as well. So, it's really up to you. We suggest that if you do consider hiring a consultant, that you still, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's your school's application and it's your money. So, we still recommend keeping close tabs on the program rules and regulations and processes because, you don't want to be the victim of a consultant's failure. But there are absolutely third parties out there who are, qualified and able to assist with the preparation of the paperwork.
Okay, thanks. All right, turning to another question from the audience. Someone's a bit confused about the timeline relating to the application and the signing of contracts and purchases. I think you indicated during your presentation that you make your selection and sign contracts prior to submitting your application, E-rate application, and then you purchase it after approval comes in. Is that how it works? If you sign a contract prior to submitting and you don't get everything you want, are you still on the hook for that? How does that all work?
That's an excellent question. So yeah, the process is that you file the 470 to start the bid, and that has to be open for a minimum of 28 days. And after 28 days passes, you select a service provider using some criteria that the FCC requires, and then you sign a contract to purchase products and services. So the program actually requires you to have the contract in place, and they define it as whatever a contract is based on your state law. So a legally binding contract to purchase equipment, we'll say, before you submit the application for funding. Now, ultimately, if funding is not available for some reason, or whatever the case may be, if it's denied, what happens next is dictated entirely by the terms and conditions of the contract that you had in place with your vendor. So you need to pay very close attention to those contract terms and conditions. One of the things that you can do is put a clause in there that says, if E-rate funds are denied, we're not moving forward with the project. So it's perfectly acceptable to make E-rate contracts contingent on the receipt of E-rate funds. So if you know that you've got $1 million project coming and you know you can't do the full $1 million project unless you have the benefit of the discount, that's something that you would want to consider writing into your contract so that you're not bound to make a purchase if E-rate funding doesn't come through for some reason.
Okay. Thank you. I had hoped to squeeze one more question in, but I see we are coming right up on the top of the hour, so I'm afraid we're going to call it a day there. If you have asked a question that we did not get to in the course of the presentation, someone from the Xirrus team will follow up with you individually to get you some answers. So finally, I want to thank Brian Stevens and Bruce Miller for two really excellent presentations. I also want to thank Xirrus for its support. And one final reminder to everyone is we will send out an email to everyone who attended today when the recording of the webinar is ready, and you'll be able to also download the slides at that point. So thank you all for attending, and this concludes today's webcast. Goodbye.